Warren, I'm sure you know that Petty is very much a part of Gainesville's lore.
This is the Holy City.
Yes, it is. And of course that UF, I Won't Back Down, is sung at every football game with all the cameras lit. And Kent Fox just announced that that we're going to be singing it at commencement.
Oh, really?
In the fall, yes.
Well, this shouldn't be just happening here. This should be happening across the country.
Correct.
Right. So I want to tell you all a little more about Dr. Zanes. He is a musician, teacher, and writer. As a musician, he made 3 records with the 80s rock and roll band the Del Fuegos, and 3 as a solo artist. He was just a teenager when Joel Vegas toured with Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. And you were barely a teenager, right?
Well, no, I was closing out on my teens. It's really,
Okay.
it's hard to remember, for good reason.
He has worked on several high-profile music projects, including the George Harrison documentary, directed by Martin Scorsese. He has 2 master's degrees and a doctorate, and is currently teaching at NYU. His writing has appeared in numerous publications, and he's written books about the history of Warner Brothers Records and about Dusty Springfield's Dusty in Memphis record. Oh, there it is. Yeah. Here in Gainesville, he is perhaps most celebrated as Tom Petty's biographer. One review described the Petty book as, quote, a biography of a reticent musician that will allow even his biggest fans to see him with fresh eyes and hear him with fresh ears. Zanes brings a depth and empathy to the narrative that never veers towards sensationalism. Dr. Clay Calvert, Brechner eminent scholar and director of the Marion B. Brechner First Amendment Project here at this college, is teaching a 1-credit course based on Petty the biography this semester, and he'll be interviewing Warren this evening. So we are thrilled to welcome Warren Zanes and Dr. Clay Calvert. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you, Diane, for that introduction. Want to go over a couple of things, basics. First of all, thank you for turning out in such numbers tonight. We really appreciate it. It's a good turn. It's a good mixture, I can tell, too, of students, Petty fans, and everybody, maybe a combination overlap among those 2 constituents here. There will be a book signing afterwards up here at 7:30 when we, hopefully that's the goal, to end the talk and the discussion. Books are for sale in the back, so you can purchase your book back there afterwards and then come on down and he'll sign it. I would say a couple things. We were talking about this, that the signing is probably not the time to do the talking with him because there are going to be other people lining up and queuing up behind him.
He also doesn't know how to stop, so I'm the problem, not you.
Okay.
Just to be clear.
Yeah, okay. So yeah, he will go on in detail. He's asked me to give him signs if he's talking too long, and I suggested one, but he said he's been given that by a lot of people. So,
particularly in traffic.
Yeah, exactly. So we're not going to use that sign. I'll just kick him or something like that. So the format will be this for about the first 40, 45 minutes. It'll just be a Q&A about the book. Because it is an academic setting in our college, it's going to focus primarily on not vignettes about Tom Petty himself so much, but about the writing process and the research process. How did you go about this book? Some of the process, getting people to talk. Some people didn't talk. How did you cajole other people to talk? And then we'll open it up. There are going to be microphones already on both sides. And if you have questions, that would be great. Ideally, students, come up and ask your questions. But we also want to make it clear, just instead of like describing that one great Petty moment that you had in '83 at a concert, and then like Chris Farley on the Chris Farley show go, that was awesome. Have a question in mind. That's all we ask. Have a question in mind. So, without further ado, I want to start with the most obvious thing and how you came to write this book. And my understanding is actually that Tom Petty actually approached you. And can you describe that, your first reaction to it, and then whether he put any conditions on that process?
Yeah, I'm going to give you a long answer just to warn you on this one, because I think so he knew me as a kid in the opening band, and then I left the music business and did the schooling part of my story. And toward the end of that, as I was approaching getting the PhD, I wrote a little book about Dusty Springfield, Dusty in Memphis. And there I was I was in Cleveland at the time, and I got a message from Tom's management saying, Tom read your book and would like to take you out to dinner to talk about it next time you're in Los Angeles. So I only raised that because what brought us back together was writing. So he had read something, and what meant the most to me was a hero of mine was willing to see me as a writer on the basis of this book, where I was still too sheepish to see myself as one. I didn't have the confidence. So to have a hero invest in you in that way is, like, I still feel very lucky in that regard. But the way that relationship unfolded was that there were writing projects prior to him mentioning a biography. So I did first some press releases. And that was just management saying, hey, Tom thought maybe you could help us with this press release. And so I just got in on the language, said, what do you want to achieve here? What's the goal? And it was just working with words and a basic agenda to alert the press about something. So it went press releases to some liner notes. I was interviewed for the Peter Bogdanovich movie, and then I did a coffee table book for the documentary.
And that's Running Down a Dream, the one you're talking about, the Bogdanovich.
Yes. And then there were some more liner notes, and then I was out working on something with Tom, and when he walked me out to his car, he said, what would you think about doing
Where was this?
Biography? In Malibu at his house.
Okay.
So, the shit goes down in the driveway. Let's just say that.
I teach a class on free speech, so I'm all good with this. So anyway.
But it's like this is life happens in the in-between spaces. I really believe that. So for students, I say just stay alert. It's like class is important, but after class and before class have equal value. So we were after class in the driveway, and he raised this. And the particularly Tom Petty part of it for me was that his mind, his speech is Southern. The cadence is slow. The mind was in no way slow. And he conceptualized how this book would happen. And I didn't have to do any of that. He was like, this is your book. You get the contract. It is not authorized. But I give you any interviews you need, and I will help you get any you want help with.
And you were saying that's pretty rare, actually, to do an unauthorized biography.
Well, I've talked with other artists, and they think if they're involved, it has to be authorized.
Right.
But his point was, and this is a very memorable moment, he said, if I go into a bookstore and I see an authorized biography, I know it's bullshit. And those were his exact words. And that's the Tom Petty part of it.
Great.
Like he's thinking of himself, just like when he made records. I go into the present tense a lot when talking about him. I think that's part of the power of the music. But as a record maker, he's thinking about being a young person hearing this stuff. That's what made him such a good songwriter and record maker. When it came to books, he was thinking about his experience as a reader and what authorized meant to him. So he took that off the table, and then the other condition was he just wanted to be able to read the manuscript at the end, and if he felt he needed to respond to something in the content, I would make room for that. And then I'm not going to tell you to take anything out, I just want the capacity to respond.
And how did that process go? So you were describing earlier really was two parts. The first half of the book, the more the historical background, and then the
Yeah, so it was... there's some grit in the life story. And we knew, and when I say we, I mean really my agent and my editor. The three of us were in close contact in this process. We knew there was going to be some material that was harder in the back half of the book. Heroin, divorce, Stan Lynch leaving the band. Three tough things. So it was my editor, Henry Holt, who said, what if we give him the first half and you do the review, and then a few weeks later do the second half? And so that worked out well, because the first half, that's Gainesville. That's the beautiful experience of an artist coming into themselves as an artist. he remembers it fondly. It's during a time where he encounters early rock and roll, Elvis. He goes through the Beatles coming on Ed Sullivan. He feels empowered enough to start bands from himself. It's glorious. It's a beautiful story, easy to digest and easy to enjoy. So we went out and we reviewed the first half, and I'll tell you because I shared this earlier, but we would work in the lounge outside his recording studio, and I would go out and there would be coffee waiting there, but nobody there, and I would sit and I would wait.
This all in Malibu again?
In Malibu, yeah, in the same driveway. And then a yellow lab would come up the driveway, and that meant that 10 feet behind would be Tom Petty. Dog comes in the door, Tom Petty comes, he's holding the first half of the manuscript, and he's patting it. And like I always share this just because I will never forget this moment. He's patting it, and I'm looking and going, this could go either way. Patting a manuscript doesn't necessarily mean anything.
Right.
And he looked at me and he said, this is really good. People are going to like this. And I was released from my pain. And then we went through it, and he made some, fact-checking corrections, and then we did the back half. And before I went out for the back half, I got a call from management saying, Tom wants you out here sooner. He needs more time. He's upset. And I went, okay. So I went out, and the upset part wasn't about don't do this, don't do that. It was exactly what we forecasted. Is these difficult passages in his life were difficult to read, and difficult to know other people would be reading. He had never come out with his heroin use because he was worried that if one young person glamorized drug use because of him, he felt like he couldn't do it. And I said, I've got some experience there. Like, I think we can do this in a way that it doesn't romanticize hard drug use. And I feel like we did that. But it's still hard.
Sure.
The divorce, really hard. So we got through that, but I think he just kind of came into the reality of my life's going out at a slightly higher level, and in a way it never has.
Gotcha. So was it tough because you'd gone on tour with him for 3 months, you said, right?
Yeah.
And your friend, how was it trying to be impartial or objective or detached, like we might be in journalism, or try to do that? Because
well, I never say I was his friend. I feel like that would be for him to say.
Okay.
Like I think that like I said to you earlier, I never went fishing with him. I wanted to. He's Earl Petty's son. They fish.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean. He trusted me to do things, and he empowered me, and he validated me. But those are all things that you don't have to be friends to do that. He did that for me. I felt a closeness. I think he felt something like that. But when we were together, we were working. So that's just. I just feel like it's my responsibility to say that.
Sure.
But my allegiance wasn't about. Was it because your question is, was it hard to get into the gritty part of the story, being a friend? It's like, it's not so much being a friend, it's like being a fan.
Okay.
Like, I feel, one reason I wanted to insert moments in my life into the book, and I did it in a pretty light way. I got in and out in a couple pages when I did it. I didn't want to impose myself too much. But one reason I did it, because I wanted the readers, most of whom were like me, they grew up with Tom Petty records, is to have that experience. Where was I? Because there I was at 12 years old, right up to 50. Different albums dropping. I'm changing, and Tom Petty's always there. So I feel like I was raised by his music in some way. So my responsibility to the text was less that of a friend than a guy who was raised by the music.
Gotcha.
And I just always wanted to have the reader close to the guy who did these songs. I didn't want heroin to be bigger than the guy who wrote Dreamville.
Right. That's actually an interesting point, too, I think. Is how do you know when you're going to talk about a subject like that, how much is too much and how much, when you came to the writing process, I guess I'll skip ahead to that, but when you're talking about, without taking a detour from your overall narrative of the book, you know, like this is enough to say about this subject, I'm going to move on, or enough about this person. How do you get that sense before you?
Well, I mean, sometimes I was just plain stupid and somebody else had to tell me to pull it out. We were talking earlier today. I had a really long section on the Cat in the Hat. And I felt like it was crucial. And my agent read through it and he's like, I think maybe we could go a little lighter on the Cat in the Hat. You know? And I'm like, really? I thought that was a good part. So sometimes you just need the brain of another person to say, get out of your own way, brother.
Gotcha.
You know? And then, but you're reading and you're reading and you're reading and you're reading. Like, I mean, I haven't read the book since it came out, but I read it many times before then.
Yeah.
And you're seeing flow. And I wanted, like, what was my model going into this? Really, my model was a Tom Petty song. It's honest. It doesn't have any fat on it. And when it's over, it's over. Like, his sense of economy, his sense of imagery, that was what I was working from. I wanted the book to be the book version of a Tom Petty song.
Where it tells something in very few words but conveys a larger meaning, too, in the process of it.
Yeah, so the Cat in the Hat, I was gassing on, man. I was playing a long solo. Yeah.
Like a jam band, and it's enough. You got to get off the stage, dude.
Yeah.
You played that far too long. What about the, tell us about some of the interviews with Petty. How did that process work? You said it was in Malibu. How many hours of tape do you think you have? Or how many hours did you probably read?
I'm such a terrible archivist, I really don't know.
Okay.
And remember, I had a lot of pre-existing material from other projects.
Okay.
So when I did the coffee table book, because I didn't have that much time, I said, give me all the transcripts. And it was 500,000 words, all the interviews for that project. And I said, send it to me in paper form. I got that box. I got a lot of material. Mm-hmm. But I will say this, and this interested me, and I sure wasn't going to open my mouth. But artists of Tom's generation are in the album cycle where they write an album, they record it, and I talk about this in the book.
Yeah.
Then they promote it, go on tour for it, then they start writing the next.
Yeah, life in the album cycle, as you call it. It never ends. It just...
Yeah, but at a certain point, the music industry shifted. Mm. And artists of this caliber with this scope to their career start thinking about things like documentaries, books, box sets that you saw Springsteen do it, you saw Neil Young do it, you saw Bob Dylan do it. So, but oftentimes they're entering into something they haven't done before. Mm-hmm. So I never had to deal with management that they could have said to me, like, we want to own all your tapes from the interviews. Nobody ever said that.
You actually have the copyright to the book. I noticed at the front too, I think, right? Yeah, it's your copyright.
It's all mine. Like,
yeah.
And I think, like, boy, if I was a manager, I would never let that happen.
Right. Yeah.
But I wasn't going to offer free advice.
Now, let's talk about some of the other interviews too. You were talking about, today we were talking a little about, well, you'd actually mentioned Stan Lynch just now. It's one of those difficult moments. Here's somebody where there's obviously a lot of friction. And tell us about how you got...
but let me just cut in and say,
yeah.
A lot of friction, a lot of love.
Right, both.
Yeah. I don't think you can have that kind of friction without something good having been transmitted between two people.
Sure.
You know, just to say.
No,
I think
cool.
I just want, it's the complexities there. But yeah, I mean, Stan, like I'll say here, I said it earlier, I wouldn't have nearly as good a book without Stan Lynch. Mm-hmm. It was a crucial interview.
But getting him to talk, initially he was reticent, is that correct? Or?
He said no. if that counts as reticent. He said no several times, and so I'd known him. I was the kid in the opening band again, and
what finally happened?
He was very kind about saying no, but I was just like, I can't not have him. Petty talks so much about Stan, so much. Stan and Jane were the two most talked about. He was still working through things. Mm-hmm. And so I'm like, oh man, I gotta have, if he comes up that much, I've gotta have a viewpoint that's not Tom's on this stuff, and it should be Stan's. So I'd try again, and the last query that I sent out was, would you give me 15 minutes if I come to your door? And if at 15 minutes you've had enough of me, I will leave with dignity. You will not have to call the cops.
Yeah.
And so we did it, and we ended up doing 2 sessions, and he gave me hours, and it was just that's how you understood this band, was through Stan and Tom as much as more than anybody else. Mm-hmm. And Stan was the extrovert. Stan was the one who said the thing that was so inappropriate that no one else is going to say it, and everybody loved him for it.
There are a lot of memorable quotes in that book.
Funny as hell.
Yeah.
Like he said, I'm a Viking. I had a Viking to talk to, and it was fantastic. And there were some amazing insights, and I don't know if they both had sadness talking about one another, because there was a breakup.
Mm-hmm. How do you get people what's your technique at really get people to trust you who may not, they probably knew you, some probably didn't, but how did you build trust and confidence for them to open up and be honest?
I really don't have much of an answer there.
Okay.
But I try not to be a bullshitter.
Right.
But you can't say to someone, "Hey, I just want you to know I'm not a bullshitter." Yeah,
They're still not going to believe you.
Well, the second you say that, you're definitely a bullshitter.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
So you got to somehow kind of show it, and you often don't have that much time.
Right.
So I don't really have a question, because an answer to your question, because I would still go at the end of the project. I would go, "What made Tom let me do that?" I'm not entirely sure, because to begin to credit myself with him doing that, it felt wrong. Mm-hmm. I don't think I made that happen. I don't know. It's pretty mystical to me in a lot of ways. I don't know how I ended up there, because we all think of ourselves as many years younger than we actually are. So I'm sitting here talking to you. I've got a PhD, but I'm 12.
I'm 13 though.
Yeah,
actually, so it's not bad.
I knew you were an older kid because you dumped my books. I remember. I'll never forget that. But I'd be sitting with Tom Petty, and I'm 12, and I've just got his first record, and he's talking to me in great confidence. So I don't know how it happened, but I'll say this, and I feel I can say this free of ego. He chose the right guy, maybe because I respected him as much as I did, but he knew that I worked hard on writing. Mm-hmm. Before I got to a place where I could write that book, I did a lot of writing that nobody ever saw.
Sure. And that's where you kind of honed it.
I gave up. I was in a creative writing program. After the band, I got my BA. It was a creative writing major, and by the end, I said, well, it's confirmed. I'm not a writer. And I'm shifted into another discipline.
But then you won him over with your previous book, and then doing the other work, and it kind of built into this.
Yeah, I don't know. I say to my own kids, I say, please work hard in school. Because do not bank on Dad's luck.
We talked about this a little bit too, about the writing process. Like, some of my students were wondering, like, when did you know you had enough material in the bank to say, I can go ahead and start writing this book? But what you were telling me earlier, you kind of wrote as you went along. How did that process work? So,
I mean, as a listener and fan, I had enough in the bank to start writing.
okay.
I'd been thinking about this guy for a long time.
Right.
You know, I'd looked at album jackets as if they were going to talk back to me, and I was waiting, you know, like hours, and often without smoking pot. You add the pot in there, and I look for a really long time. You know.
I don't know what I'm going to say about that one. I don't know. Well, also, no. It's fine. Go on. Fascinating process. So it's an iterative process. Let's put it that way. How does that sound? So you've got some information already in the bank. What other types of research did you do besides the interview?
To answer that question, a lot of it is like you'll write something, and you should feel like you're doing something bold. Mm-hmm. And if I felt like I was doing something, maybe this is too bold, I would run it past Petty in some way. Not reading him material, but it might even be casually, like we're just drinking coffee and I just throw an idea out there. But actually I'd been writing it, just to see what his reaction would be.
So you're not really setting him up for something, but you've got something in mind?
I'm testing, because I don't want to ultimately hand him a manuscript that he goes, where in God's name did you get this? Mm-hmm. So I'm testing material, but I think through all the listening I've done that I know this guy. I think I know him, and I think I was right. He's very honest in his songs. He's in there.
Right.
I think he's more, well, there's a couple Tom Pettys. There's the one who's got to move through the world, and I think that, there was hard stuff there, and he could be quite guarded when he wasn't with friends. He could be quite open with people like, George Harrison, the musicians that he had friendships with. But he was dealing with a lot of shit being a band leader. I think then there's the other Tom Petty, who I think was quite open in his songs, and that's what we respond to. There's honesty in there. You can't... I was saying this in one of the interviews I did for the Elvis Presley documentary. Like, we don't know how it happens, but we can tell when someone's singing a song and they mean it. Mm-hmm. We respond to that. There's something in there. And that's what I could bank on in Tom Petty. Good songs, but honest songs. So anytime I was going through something in life, I played you The Waiting. I don't think I've fallen in love, and I've done it many times, without going to The Waiting and listening to The Waiting and feeling like in those first lines, like,
the excitement of it.
Oh my God.
Feels like heaven.
Like, it's great falling in love, right? Yes. Are we all together in this? It's 10% better when you're listening to Tom Petty. And that's saying something.
Now, if you were smoking pot, how much better would it be? 11. No, don't get 11. But I was good to 11. That's right. So, yeah. Can I ask you another question? Looking back on it now, is there something that you wish you could have asked somebody that you didn't ask? Or if you could go back and interview somebody?
I wish I could talk to Dylan. I wish I could have a moment with Dylan to see what he might say.
Did he not give you access?
He's another species to everybody.
Okay.
It's like, I could go, it's like, Tom and his manager, Tony, they really would ask everybody, but it was like, Bob, don't even go there.
Really? Okay.
When I worked on the George Harrison documentary, I thought, well, Harrison and Bob were really close friends, and Martin Scorsese had just directed the Dylan movie. Of course there's going to be a Bob Dylan interview.
Sure.
No.
Yeah.
And Olivia Harrison said his gift to that project was to let the Traveling Wilburys stuff happen and not hold it up.
Yeah.
I'm like, he is a mysterious figure. I told you, there was one thing he asked me to take out of this book. and it was something he said about Dylan. And it was generally about how hard it was that Dylan would change the song every time they played it. Like the melody would be different, the groove would be different. Everybody knows Dylan does this. So Petty said something about it in an interview, and when he went to that, I said, Tom, that actually doesn't come from our interviews. I got that from an interview that you did that was published in the 80s. And he looked at me and said, well, I got away with it once. And I yanked it.
Tell us about, you talked to, and you've got some great lines in there where you play with the song, the roadie named Bugs instead of a roadie named Bart. But you had to interview Bugs, the roadie, and this was the first interview he had ever done versus many of the other people have been interviewed probably hundreds of times.
But I mean, if anybody knows where the bodies are buried, it's Bugs.
Right.
That was a lot of bees.
Yeah.
If anybody knows where the bodies are buried, it's
Bugs.
4 bees.
You betcha. You betcha.
So he was, you know, there were scenes like Tom describing Bugs driving a pickup, and he and George Harrison are there, and they're going to this party of George Michael's where they think Dylan has gone, because Dylan left their Traveling Wilburys meeting earlier, and they're like, we think he's going to George Michael's party. I'm like, this is a fantastic setup already.
Yeah, exactly.
I didn't put this in the book. And George Harrison, Petty would talk about him, it wasn't easy being a Beatle. I think George has said, you gave us your hearts, we gave you our nervous systems. And I think there's some truth to that. But he knew how to take advantage of being a Beatle when it came to parking his car. So he would pull up to Petty told a couple of stories. He would pull up like right in the front. This is not even like going to the handicap. This is like driving to the front door where the steps are to a building. And he'd get out, George of the famous Beatles. And who's going to say anything, right? So they go to George Michael's house. Bugs is driving this pickup truck, and George is like, just go right to the front of the house. George of the famous Beatles. And they leave this pickup truck there. Bugs has seen all this stuff.
Right.
And he's smart. If you want to keep your job and you work with a celebrity, don't ever give interviews.
Right.
So I knew I wanted Bugs, and I arranged it through management, and I thought Tom knew that we were going to do it, and I did the interview, and I'm mentioning the interview with Bugs, and Petty looks at me and he's like, Bugs talked to you? And I'm like, I thought you knew. And the amazing thing about this interview, what I would have thought is the guy who knew not to give interviews because he's too close, he knows too much. I thought it would be a guarded, reserved interview. And it was the most unguarded. It made me anxious that he was telling me, because I'm like, I don't want to know this.
Right, yeah.
Because I don't feel like I'm responsible enough.
Yeah,
right?
To handle the fact, yeah.
And he called me later, and he was like, man, I feel really weird about like some of the things I said. And I just said, you know, I like you guys too much to use it in a way that would hurt you.
Right.
So there's a lot in this book. There's a lot that's not in this book.
Yeah. I mean, I imagine that was a tough call. I mean, you had, besides the editors and the agents saying things shouldn't go in, I mean, you have reams of material to go with and try to whittle it down to what you wanted to do.
Well, look, Beatles were together 7 years? I mean, they were recording for 7 years. Not that long. Heartbreakers like over 4 decades. Some shit went down.
Right. So they're
like, make no mistake.
Now, when they have disagreements about the excrement going down, I would usually be saying it, that's okay. But there was let's say they're factual disputes. So, you know, memories do fade, they grow older or whatever, they might not have been there at the time completely. But if there's a point where they don't agree on something, how did you try to illustrate that, or how would you deal with that? One person says this, the other person says that, or somebody else says something else.
I find those to be the most interesting moments, so I go after them. Because also this is a book about Tom Petty, but it's also a book about bands through the lens of Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. And if you look up the definition of a band, it's like, group of people who see things differently, right? Mm-hmm. Who love one another, who make a sound that no other group can make. Beatles, Quincy Jones just did that interview where he was really hard on Ringo.
Right.
But Ringo was exactly the right drummer for the Beatles. It took those 4 guys to make that sound.
You make it clear in your book that they're hard on every drummer basically in the band was pretty much.
I think every band is hard on every drummer.
Okay, yeah.
It's not. There's a reason I'm not a drummer. But they do this special thing, and you can't move people in and out easily. But they also don't see things the same way. Mm. So when you're telling a story, like that moment when Elliot Roberts comes in to manage the band and says to Tom, this should not be an even split of money. You're doing 90% of the work and you're splitting it evenly. That has to change or your band won't last. Mm-hmm. And that was a really sophisticated take because it's counterintuitive. You would think the way you keep a band together is you give everybody equal amounts. And Elliot Roberts, told him, like, you're going to have too much of a resentment. Mm-hmm.
Later on,
that's how it's going to come apart. So you got to deal with this now. So every guy had a different investment in that change, mm-hmm. and told the story differently.
Sure.
Like Mike had an easier time making peace with it because he knew he was getting co-writing credits, and he had some of the most important. So suddenly, it's like when Rick Danko was the first guy in the band to get a big check, and it threw that band way out of balance. But the Heartbreakers were going to go from this to this guy makes a lot, this guy makes this, and that's hard.
You even have that, I think, when they get dropped, Mudcrutch gets dropped. Campbell was still on a payroll, I think, at some point, right? I mean,
yeah.
There was always, he was the lieutenant, basically, to Petty. It seemed like they had a relationship that seemed different from the others.
Yeah, I mean, I think Tom was very smart and aware of Mike's gift.
Yeah.
Like Mike, from a very, there are guitar players who learn to play to the song. It just seems like Mike, by instinct, knew that. Mm-hmm. Most guitar players want to go out there and overplay,
show their stuff, yeah.
Yeah, and they just get beaten into submission, Mike knew it. He had taste from the beginning.
You talk about that scene where he first comes out and with his guitar and he plays Johnny Be Good, I think is what the scene is, right, pretty much? And he just wows them with this guitar that his dad had brought over from Okinawa or something, right? Yeah, it's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
Can we go to the book itself and start going back? You lead, really, with this kind of depressing scene. Petty's reached such great stardom, hit after hit, album after album, and yet he's in Pacific Palisades in the house that you call the Chicken Shack, basically, kind of isolated, barricaded, alone. The cleaning lady is stealing things from him. There's the hint of the drug use going on at the stage. Why did you choose to lead with that part when most of the book is chronological? I mean, then you go back to the history, not just his dad, but his grandfather, and that. So how did you pick that scene? Because there's so much information, you could have started anywhere. Why there? Yeah.
Well, we see stars in a particular light, which is somewhat idealized. It's the way they present themselves. Stars present themselves in an idealized version because we want that, because that's how you sell product. There are a lot of reasons for it, but we envision their lives as something they're often not, as a lived experience. But I wanted to get to a moment where being a success and being a star stopped meaning anything to Petty. Mm-hmm. And he was just a human having a hard time in his life. Because I think that creates a capacity for the reader to identify, like, okay, this is going to be a story about a guy who's both one of us and not one of us. He's had this exceptional experience, but behind it all, there's this human being, vulnerable in the ways we're vulnerable.
Yeah.
So I felt like starting there brought the necessary sympathies from the reader that could propel the narrative.
Yeah. Tell us about interviewing Stevie Nicks, and how did that go? Because she played a pretty prominent role.
I mean, it was just beautiful. It was all love from her. She's so. There are no reservation in saying, I love this band. I love this guy. There's a lot of joy in how she sees them. I mean, it's amazing that, since that time, that Mike Campbell is in Fleetwood Mac is just astounding and not astounding. It was a logical conclusion to the events that transpired. But she was super open. And, when it came to asking about their relationship, she was like, well, what does Tom say?
Yeah. Because at one point you said, from the outside it sounds like you had an affair, and you read it back to him, he goes, yeah, it kind of does, or something like that. I mean, that was kind of like.
I got them to go about as far as they were gonna go.
Yeah.
In talking, and that's where I left it.
And you just knew not to go there.
I think they said enough.
Yeah.
I feel like it's in there.
Sure.
I can't remember what the exact. I'll have to read the book to see, but I felt it in okay, everybody's okay with this? Okay, feels to me like it's in there. Right?
Before we go over to your questions, which we're going to get to in a second, I just want to ask you a few things. For our journalism students, because this is really a great piece of journalism, really. I mean, you interview tons of people, you get your research, you write it, it's an easy read, it's interesting, it moves quickly. What piece of advice would you give for a journalism student in conducting interviews? Or what pieces of advice?
Conducting interviews?
Yeah.
Well, my
not to follow me up here or something like that? Or
my first live interview, in this kind of setting, was with Mary Wilson from the Supremes when I was working at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And, I grew up listening to the Supremes like so many of us did. And the reason for this interview, there's an exhibit of their Supremes gowns through the years. And it was really a great exhibit because you'd see the jewel-encrusted gowns, and then as the context changed, including art and the '60s, there's a shift. You see the gowns change. So it's a cool way. I think you can do a lot through fashion. But there was one moment where it was a very pop art, very Warhol kind of aesthetic, and I asked this question. I said, there's one, set of gowns that are really, they seem like Andy Warhol influenced. I said, well, does that sound accurate? And she's looking at me like, what's he talking about? And I said, well, I studied a lot of art history, so that's why I asked. And she looked at me and said, well, maybe we should be talking about you. And it was like, wow, oh shit. And I really learned my lesson, do not reference yourself. And it was really innocent.
Sure.
I wasn't going, let me tell you a story about me.
Right.
I was really going okay, she's not getting where I'm coming from. And I thought I was saying something in service of the interview. But really, when somebody's being interviewed, they can be quite sensitive.
Sure.
They're concerned about you going to places they don't want to go. So you want to really establish that you are there in their service.
Right.
Without being sycophantic.
Right.
But that was I didn't know how to get my rhythm back after that.
Yeah. So leave yourself and your own accomplishments, or I studied, but leave that all out, right?
Leave it.
But don't look like you're kissing ass. Since we're saying everything now, we might as well go there.
Right. Make good eye contact. When they are talking, listen.
Right.
Let them know you're listening. Eye contact is a big part of it. If you need to look down to prepare your next question,
right,
do it in such a fashion that they don't feel like they're just yammering on while you prepare your next question.
Sure, right.
So live interviews really helped me to prepare that next question while I'm also listening. You almost have to begin thinking with two minds. So live is different from like a taped interview.
Sure.
But I picked up a lot of skills doing people on stages like this.
Okay.
And on camera, you have on camera interviews, you have live with an audience interviews, you have just the two of us interviews. Each one gives you a different set of skills. But what I
you said never fall asleep also was another thing when you're doing the interview.
It's so bad. If you are sitting across from someone and they go, it's over.
It's done.
The event is over. They've left the room.
Elvis has left, or somebody else. Can you talk, that was about more the interview process, but something about the writing. You obviously have a ton of great quotes that you can use and go through, but you also want to use probably your own voice in there too. So a little bit of your own narration, but blended with quotes. How do you do that? Because obviously the book can't just be a Rolling Stone interview of your question, how do you interweave your own writing and narration to tell something versus having the quotes say it?
Well, I was talking to Peter Grolnick about how he did his books.
Okay.
And he did the great Elvis Presley books. He did Sweet Soul Music, the more recent Sam Phillips book. And I asked how he organized it, and he said that he used file cards, like he learned it from his kids when they were doing
Studying.
school
Yeah.
things. And he would organize. And I've done some of that where you put quotes on the file cards and you kind of organize them on the floor in space so you can see, okay, it's going from here to there. You can see the shape. And once you see the general shape, then your voice is the interstitial material gluing it together. And
how you get from point A to point B and all the way down.
Yeah.
You got to find that point.
Yeah, but I don't. It's actually kind of hard to answer because
Sure.
I only know it in process.
Right.
But there's the old, I think it's Flaubert who said, there is no writing, there's only rewriting. So there was a lot of rewriting, rereading, rewriting.
Yeah.
And something happens along the way where you know to stop talking about the cat in the hat.
Yeah. when the agent says stop doing that so much. Tell us about the last question I'll ask is the writing itself. Some people have, they like to write in one particular place, or I write 3 hours a day, I'm done, I write X number of words, I write a quota. Tell us about your own writing. Where do you most comfortable? Is there a physical setting, Starbucks, what do you do?
I would only go to a Starbucks of necessity, but I've definitely written in some, more public kind of places. I get distracted.
Right.
Though I'll say this: airplanes are one of the best for me.
Yeah.
You cannot leave.
Right. No.
I don't know if you know this about airplanes, but that door is not meant to be used.
I tried that one time, and I didn't go very far.
But I circulate in my house.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, like I saved a picture from when I was finishing my dissertation, and we were living in a brownstone in Brooklyn, and there are books everywhere. It was just I'd taken this couch and into the living room, and it was just filled with books and file cards.
Right.
And so I'm like a little bit itinerant within the domestic space.
Okay.
But once I set up shop, it's like, it looks like it's just a mess, but it's like, don't touch that!
Right. You know where it
has
is.
It's a simple mind kind of.
You know where it is. Oh, yeah, the chalkboard.
Yeah, exactly.
Don't erase the chalkboard.
It
the
looks like chaos, but it's not.
Right.
It's my chaos. I've worked on this this for years.
Don't touch the cards. That's the biggest lesson. Don't touch the cards.
But I told you earlier today, though,
Yeah.
when I finally, with the Tom Petty project,
Yeah.
I waited for quite a while to shop it. So I was just working on it with some confidence that
You didn't have an agent, you said, right, initially?
no agent, no editor, no contract, no nothing. So when I finally did that, you get that advance check, and I love advance checks. I wish I could. I went every day. But I went and I got myself a really nice George Nelson swag leg desk, like beautiful mid-century thing, and never once did I sit at it. Not once. Damn thing just sat there and looked pretty.
Well, you got it. You still have it, I'm assuming?
I still don't write at it.
Okay, well, use it as a dining table or something else.
Like
That's brilliant.
I have fought for office space in my house with my family, and
You lose?
no, I win, and then they love to remind me that I'd never use those spaces after being not so nice and fighting for it.
Gotcha. So at this stage, let's take questions. If you have questions, students or otherwise, but just make them questions. Like we said, we've got microphones down in the front if you want to come down. Something I didn't ask or that you have, and they don't have to necessarily be on the writing or the research process, but something related to the book itself generally. If you have any questions, come on down and we can go into them.
But I think they want to save it, right?
Yeah, we're recording it. It'd be great if you don't mind. Yeah. Just,
You mentioned that Stan and Jane were, kind of really key to the book, but there wasn't much Jane, and I understand maybe you didn't ever interview her. Did you try? Were you asked not to? If you could explain a little about that.
It starts to, you're into sensitive territory there, so I just want to deal with it as sensitive territory. It wasn't possible at the time I was doing the book. And, in an ideal world, you get everybody's voice, but it's not an ideal world, and it wasn't possible at that time.
were there other people who also didn't give you access, who you wanted to speak with, or?
Well, I wouldn't say it was a
not a
matter
matter of
of not getting access. To be fair, it was just not possible at the time.
Okay, sure.
Well, no, I mean, there was the Bob Dylan thing, but that was just par for the course. Mostly people were talking. I could always have done more. There were always more people.
Yeah.
But it wasn't meant to be a forum in which every voice was heard,
Sure.
or every voice was heard equally.
Right.
So, think of that band structure. Tom did have the greatest amount of space.
Mm-hmm. Not just in terms of the people, like, this person may not talk, you don't need them, but when you're writing something, you could conceivably, for any writer, you could conceivably work a scene over and over and keep tinkering with your own writing, like go back, I could write that scene better. How do you kind of say, okay, I've written that scene as well as I can, I'm going to put it in the can kind of thing and move on to the next part of the book? Or do you just...
Well, not to sound like a neurotic mess, but I remember when it was finished and I think I was in the Minneapolis airport, and I was saying to my agent, like, this book is so flawed. I was despairing, and it was done. It's the book. It's that book.
Right. What didn't you like? What didn't you like about it?
I think I was just having an experience that you have, like it's a little bit of a postpartum.
Yeah, giving birth to the book, and you're kind of like,
you have to stop.
Yeah.
Because it could go forever.
Right.
I feel like for teachers, you can prepare your class forever. Mm-hmm. You have to stop at some point so that you can have dinner with your family.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
But you could go forever.
Yeah.
But you have to stop. And sometimes it's better to stop way earlier than you did, but you could go forever with the book.
Well, that's another question, too, is that now, since Tom Petty has passed almost a year ago, coming up on October 2, Are there plans? Do you envision doing a coda kind of a thing or anything?
Well, I just sat with my editor just like 2 days ago to talk about this, because my friend Bill Flanagan, who's himself a great writer, said, you really need to do an edition that has another chapter in it. And my agent feels like a shorter epilogue makes sense, and I kind of feel the same way. I feel like if there's another story to tell, it may not be me who needs to tell it. I feel like this feels complete with a short reflection on what it meant to go through this, and then, a year after it came out, lose him, I think is appropriate. But I don't think I want to necessarily tell the story of the last tour. I think it would be good if somebody did. I don't know.
How much of that would also be, not just the last tour, where obviously he was in pain and some of the last scenes, but about the reaction and people's reaction? Do you think people perceive him now in a different light? Or
I was talking to his manager, Tony, about this, and right after Tom's passing and, remarking on the response to his death, and Tony's like, it's a shame that this didn't happen when he was alive. And I was like, I'm not sure that it didn't.
the appreciation part?
Yeah, I think he is, I was talking about the difference between Bruce Springsteen and Tom Petty, two guys of the same generation, and how different they self-present and how differently they live as artists. And I adore them both. But very different, and Tom was just more song and record focused throughout his life.
Right.
Less of the big public person. And Bruce Springsteen is incredibly good at that, and I cherish every moment that he is that. But Tom was different, so I don't think I think that's why Tony felt that, is that the world hadn't done that. But it was incredible. When Prince died, there was a lot of, rightly, there was a lot of tribute paid.
Right.
But when artists started to play Prince in their shows around the time of his death, it was almost always Purple Rain. When Tom died, it was like everybody did a different song.
Yeah.
And it told you something, and this is not to diminish Prince's catalog,
Right.
but the way that Tom's catalog is experienced, it's like, I always say Hank Williams, Buddy Holly. It's really wide, and everybody's got their favorites. And it's so, for somebody who's sitting with an acoustic guitar, you can drop into these songs with an ease that shows both their accessibility but also their durability. When a terrible guitar player who can't sing sits down and gets into a Tom Petty song, you see how good that song is, because even they can bring some life to it. It's amazing. So the tributes went way wide.
Right.
And I think it just gave everybody who already loved him a chance to say, I love this guy.
Yeah.
So the effect was awesome.
Right.
It was beautiful.
He'd appreciate it. Do you have a question?
Yes, I'm the person that had been to Earl's house and seen the tour cases in the shed in the back, and then completely flipped out when I read that it was a nuclear fallout shelter. Do you know what happened with the tour cases?
I don't. Or with the fallout shelter. And I remember asking Tom, but I don't know. Sorry?
I'm sure it got buried.
Yeah, that would make sense. Yeah.
It looked like a garage or something.
Right. So were you a neighbor?
No, the man that owned the bait shop, I was dating his son. And Tom sent us VIP tickets to some concert. And so we used to come over and see Earl.
Oh, cool.
And I'm the one that was having a fit saying, Earl really was proud of him, because he was. He had his gold records on the wall, and he toured me all around everywhere.
Right. I mean, I think at the end of Earl's life that Tom did perceive that he was proud.
I hope so.
Yeah,
'Cause
I sense that. I just don't think that they had a lot of talk, father-son talk, and I think that was consistent with that generation.
yeah, I saw Don Felder said the same thing
Yeah.
about his dad. But
Yeah.
I love the book, and I enjoyed
Thank you.
chatting about it on Twitter with you.
Thank you.
We got another question?
Yes, I have
All
a
right.
question.
Fire away.
Historian, and when I picked up the book, I was avoiding a dissertation chapter, and I thought, this will be fun, I'll read this. Didn't know I was picking up music history. So you do a wonderful job of weaving song lyrics through your chapters and creating these little vignettes, and it's like, that's that song. So I don't know if you can answer this question, but did you pick those moments because those were songs that really spoke to you, or were those just moments that jumped out at you?
I mean, that's one thing, like, just today, I was at the gym at the hotel, and I'm like, I'm going to listen to a couple Tom Petty records, and I listened to Hard Promises and Long After Dark, and I kept hearing couplets that were good enough to be in a book. So I didn't think about it in advance, and if anything, I felt like there could be 200 more because of the strength of his writing. So there wasn't a lot of thought, and the way it happens for me is in the listening process. I go, damn it, that's the couplet. I was listening to One Story Town that starts out Long After Dark. I'm like, wow, what a way to open a record.
Well, it says something about your writing that you can pick up on the songs in the various chapters. And it's like, oh, that's that song, or oh, that's, Lost in Your Eyes, or even The Losers, or whatever. So.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. I feel like he makes it easy.
Another question? We'll take one more.
Real quickly, I think one of the kind of unacknowledged aspects of Petty is that he's a very funny guy. If you listen to his radio show, he seemed like he was very humorous. I was just wondering if that was your experience with interviewing, because reading a lot of the information about him, especially after he passed, people didn't really mention that, but I think it was a kind of an aspect of his personality that's overlooked.
Well, we were talking at lunch today about Petty being one of the least likely stars of the MTV era. Like, he's not a video kind of guy, but he made great videos. And I think what made them great is that he could bring his sense of humor out more overtly in that context, where in a pop song, we are looking more for emotion. That's just what we're geared toward. There are people like Randy Newman, Tom Waits, Joe Walsh, yeah, good example, who find space for humor, but it's often it crowds out the emotion a little bit, and I think just Tom's very emotional. I think that's why he lasts long, but he is a very funny guy, and you see it in the videos. But when we were talking, it was often deep, talking about family, talking about problems in the band, problems in the business, and how he moved forward despite that. So it wasn't the same Tom Petty that I would, I have it in the book, when I walked into that room and it was Jeff Lynne and George Harrison and Tom Petty and Mike Campbell. He was having a great time and they were laughing. And people were drawn to him because of that humor, for sure. Because he was cool, because he was funny, because good songs happened if he was in the room. But funny was a big part of it.
As we wrap this up, just wanted to say a couple things. So the books are for sale. If you'd like to buy one in the corner. And then Warren's willing to sign books up here. So we've got plenty of Sharpies. We brought them with us. I'd like to say a couple of thank yous before I leave this tonight. First, thank you all for coming out. I really appreciate it. It's a great turnout. I think Tom Petty would be pleased with it too, to know this. I'd like to thank so many people. I'm not going to name them because I will leave people out if I try to start naming people. But so many people in the college College of Communications, College of Journalism and Communications are involved in this, from the funding efforts to the publicity, to setting it up, to the recording, to the sound, to the audio, to the book signing. It's a real team effort, and so you get to see me up here, and I kind of get this glory scene, kind of, but it's like so many other people went into this, so I want to thank everybody for doing that. And finally, I want to thank Warren Zanes for coming down to Gainesville. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank all of you. It's a real treat for me.